We are praying through the Psalms in our preparation for Easter, which is just around the corner. I believe next Sunday is Palm Sunday, so we're getting pretty close there. So we're kind of exercising some things about prayer, especially in the Psalms, but not all the Psalms are prayers. And so like Psalms 1 is not a prayer. Some of them are just statements of faith. Psalm 1 is more of a beatitude than it is a prayer. So I want you to hear these words about what is pleasing to God. So hear these words, and so be in an attitude of prayer, or however you choose to do that, to listen closely. Happy or blessed are those who do not follow the advice of the wicked, or take the path that sinners tread, or sit in the seat of scoffers. But their delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law they meditate day and night. They are like trees planted by the streams of water. They yield their fruit in its season, and their leaves do not wither. In all they do, they prosper. The wicked, not so. They're like chaff that the wind drives away. Therefore the wicked shall not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord watches over the ways of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. Here ends these words. This is going to be kind of some recall Sunday, if you will. Several months ago, you remember that? We did a sermon series. What was it? No. The sermon series we did on the Sermon on the Mount. And the Sermon on the Mount is a 3-chapter statement where Jesus tells his disciples everything that they need to know in order to follow Christ. Okay? Everything they need to know. So trivia question number 1. Where can you find the Sermon on the Mount? Okay, 4 of you got it. Okay. All right. One day I'm going to put it on a slide so y'all can read it. I'm trying to help you out here, okay? This is what I had to have when I get through school. I had to have someone slip me a few notes. Okay, so in this sermon, Jesus spells out, there's really 3 short chapters, everything you need to know to be a follower of Christ. Everything. Everything. In this, he talks about who he is. He talks about how God is going to use him. He talks about how his message, his methods, and how even his actions are going to be different from what the people of God had been taught to do. They're going to be different. He tells them what God expects from the people of God or from us. He tells us how our actions that come from our faith, how they look. He also tells us how we're supposed to conduct our lives, both in the public and in the private. Everything you want to know about being a follower of Jesus is found in these 3 simple chapters. If you read nothing in your entire life of Scripture except for those 3 chapters, you'll be far and above, further along than the majority of people in this faith. I don't care if you read Genesis through Revelation. That's done nothing for me. That's why I've never done it. But read those 3 chapters. If you did nothing but read those 3 chapters 15 times a year, and hear those words, struggle with those words, meditate on those words, you're going to get it. You're going to understand what God is trying to teach us. It's in those 3 chapters. There's absolutely no reason why we can't read those and reread those and reread those and reread those. Absolutely none. So there it is. To begin the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus has a very small section in there that begins the Sermon on the Mount. You know what that's called? Trivia question number 2. No video on this one. Beatitudes. You've heard of that? Did you get it? Beatitudes? We did a sermon series on the Beatitudes also. I know you remember that. But really, to me, what the Beatitudes are is an answer to what pleases God. What is pleasing to God? And so I want you to think about that question just for a minute. What's pleasing to God? Because what is pleasing to God, you're going to learn, is far different than what is pleasing to others. Think about that. What pleases other people? What used to please your parents? What is that which is pleasing to others? That's a question. How do we please people? Anybody? You hadn't found out yet, huh? This is a question.
Be happy.
For you to be happy, that makes people happy. Okay, it's kind of a contagious thing. How do we please people? Do what they want. Isn't that the truth? Then they're not happy because you didn't do it right. How do we please? Achievements? Anybody go home with a piece of paper that says you achieved something? How does your parents react? Are we here today? Is this on? Okay, this is called classroom participation, people. This is not the old church of 1842 where if you'd say something, you get your sideburns pulled, okay? This is where we're going to interact because it's important that we learn, okay? The only way we learn is not to stare and gaze like we're sleeping with our eyes open, but to interact. So interact. How do we make people like us? How do we please people? We have to achieve things, right? We have to accomplish certain things, right? We have to jump through certain hoops. What else? Anybody? Be a good listener. What about positions of authority? Don't we like that? What's your position in the church, Jenny? Senior minister. Oh, senior minister. Ooh. You mean you're not an associate? Right? Come on. It's positions of authority we like. That's very pleasing to people. Finishing tasks. Isn't that pleasing? What about grades? Anybody get excited about a 1.0 from your kid? Yes. Separated at birth. Yeah, that's right. Keep those standards. That was high. Okay? Advancements, anything, job raises, everything that kind of moves up, moves up, moves up. That's very pleasing to other people. And that is different, right, from maybe what's pleasing to God. So we can say what pleases people is how well we do in whatever we do. Is there anything wrong with that? No. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm just talking about what pleases us. Okay? So it makes sense to me that if this is what really pleases us the most, then it only makes sense that if we want to please God, then we better do what it is that God expects us to do, or there will be hell to pay, quite literally, right? Because in a lot of our understanding of God, that God's that mean old boss at work, and we know how we deal with mean old bosses, right? We ignore them. We close our ears. We avoid them at all costs. We keep them at a distance, and we just do what we think we're supposed to do, and we cross our fingers and we hope and pray that when our time comes, we get an advancement, right? So it makes a lot of sense that we take what pleases people into our relationship with God. But the importance of the Beatitudes that begin the most important conversation or teachings of Jesus, or in my opinion, the whole scriptures, they tell a whole different story about what is pleasing to God. What do you have to do to please God? And here's the kicker for this. If we understand these Beatitudes, then we're going to understand Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. If we understand that sermon, those 3 chapters, then we're going to understand Jesus, and we're going to understand what he does and why he does what he does. We're going to get it. If we understand Jesus, then we are going to understand God. We're going to sneak into the mind of God, and our faith is going to grow exponentially, right? And so the Beatitudes attempt to get us in the right frame of mind. It helps us to try to get in a state of being, not doing. We are doing people, right? In a state of being, to get where God needs us to be as true characteristics of God's people. You follow me? Let's put it another way, all right? The purpose of the Sermon on the Mount is to help us to reap a harvest, right? We want to have a harvest of wisdom that comes directly from God. We want to reap a harvest of this appropriate behavior that's reminiscent of God's people. We want to reap a harvest of spiritual strength that helps us keep us focused on who we are, that's defined by God, and also a harvest of empowerment for us to stay the course and to fulfill our purpose that God has given us on this earth. So if our lives, if we think in farmer terms, if our lives were a field, right? If it were a field, the end result that God is looking for in our lives would look like this. Any farmers in here? I didn't think so. Isn't that pretty? Isn't that what we want as a farmer? For our end product of our lives to look like that? But you know what? We can't get that if our ground looks like this. Right? So the importance of the Beatitudes is to prepare our hearts, is to till our minds, is to cultivate our souls so that growth can take place and look like this. That's beautiful for a farmer, because now the farmer says what God says. Ah, now you're ready to grow. You feel me? And here's the deal. If we do not allow the Beatitudes to do their work like this within us, we're not going to understand Jesus' sermon. If we don't understand his sermon, then we're not going to understand Jesus at all. If we don't understand Jesus, then God is going to be very distant. God is going to be cold. God is going to be abusive. And the church is just going to be just another old, cold, stale building up on the hill of the town that needs to be plowed over because it's not doing anything it's designed to do. So the Beatitudes set the tone for the rest of the sermon by defining what the word blessing means, by defining what the word success means, which happens also to be complete opposite of how we define success in the world. Success in our society, let's think about that, is defined how? It's defined by what? Advancement, money, right? Pay raises, home runs, touchdowns, bigger things, fancier things. That's how we define what success is, right? Advancements, getting on top. Is there something wrong with that? No, there's nothing wrong with that. That's just how we define success in the world in which we live. The Beatitudes say success in our relationship with God is much different. It's defined completely different. In the Beatitudes, he says, what does God say success for our lives is this, is to have a humble spirit. Because if we have a humble spirit, then we're able to listen to the voice of God in our lives. Then we're not the ones who's in control. We're not the ones who have to play God with everybody's lives around us. We allow God to be God, and we listen to the voice of God in our lives. We have a hunger and a thirst for God's justice in the world. We see things that are not right, and we strive to bring the solutions to the problems that exist in the world and not ignore them and not pretend they don't exist. We make solutions because we have a hunger and a thirst for God's justice in the world. That's success. To see with mercy the hurts and the pains of people around us, that's success. It's to bring peace to conflict in people's hearts that are just warring and struggling and can't forgive. That's success. It's to be willing to forfeit one's very life just for the sake of another person, even if it means your own life, that you will die in the process. That is success in God's world. Can you see the difference between the two? Can you see the problem that we have, especially in this land of the free? Because the problem is you can't live large in both worlds. You can't live large. That's the problem. Even Jesus in this sermon says, you know what? You can't serve both of them. You'll either love one and hate the other, or you'll be involved in one and you start resenting the other. It just can't work. You got to choose one or the other. You can't live large in both. You have to choose which one is going to be your God. You can't live both. It's a struggle. And this is the struggle that we see time and time again in our own lives. Anybody have kids who play sports? Anybody know anybody had kids who play sports? I've had 3. And what's the struggle with that? Anybody? Practice on Wednesday nights. Weekend tournaments. It's a struggle. You know? And you start saying, I got a tournament on this. Who thought about putting church on Sunday? Whose bright idea was that? That's softball day. That's basketball. It's a struggle. It is a common struggle. You know, and so you start to resent things you have to do in one place in order to fulfill another. And they always at combat with one another. It's always a thing that's enough to drive us absolutely crazy because it's a struggle to know who it is that gets our loyalty. Who gets our money? Who gets our time? Our loyalty. Who's going to have it? This is the struggle for all of us in this world because we live on the left, but we're trying to live out the right. And those two are always in conflict with each other. I'll be honest with you, you know. If I had my ways, you know where I'd be spending Sundays every now and then? At the lake. That would be nice. And I'm not here just because I get paid to be here. I'm not one of those hired Christians. But it's a struggle. And this is the problem that we have because we have to choose one or the other because they're always at odds. Now, I'm going to say this. I think that we choose to be here because we want to be successful in our relationship with God. But in order for us to be successful in our relationship with God, we're going to have to be willing to make some adjustments with the way that we think, with the way that we act, and the way that we give, and the way that we see life through the eyes of God as opposed through the eyes of society. That doesn't mean that we just ditch everything on one side and get honed in on the other side. It just simply means that we have to continue to struggle with what it is that God desires us to be. Because once we stop that struggle and just give in to the ways of society and start using God to get our way, that's where we become something that we do not want to be. And do you know what you call those people that do that? Ooh, Billy. No, I don't call you Billy. Psalm 1 calls them what? Scoffers, wicked, sinners. Those aren't people outside the church. It is a people of faith who just says, you know what? I'm not going to struggle with this anymore. I am going to go and I'm going to serve everything that I want to do, and I'm going to use God to get it. Speaking of Psalm 1, wasn't that what our sermon was supposed to be about? Okay, that's the introduction. Now for the sermon. No, seriously. Do you know what this Sermon on the Mount and Psalms have in common? Close. They both reveal the true essence of God that is unmatched by any other book in their Testament. In other words, if you really want to know what God is like, and you're in the Old Testament, read the Psalms. If you really want to know what God is like in the New Testament, read the Sermon on the Mount. That's one. The second thing they have in common is that they both begin with Beatitudes as a way to set the tone for the rest of the body of work. If you understand the Beatitude and where God wants to be and what is pleasing to God, then you will understand the full body of work. And you will have access to the very mind of God. So for the people of faith, I think our warning that we receive from Psalm 1, as we will listen to, is to be very careful and continue that struggle between which gods do we serve, the gods of our secular society and all that it entails, or this God. Don't forget to struggle with that. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm not going to make your decisions for you. You're big people. Do it on your own. But there is a fine line between being faithful children of God and what the psalmist says, being wicked, being a sinner, and scoffer. These folks don't try to live their life right. People of faith struggle every single day to do what is right. When we're in the struggle, we're in the game. If we forget the struggle, then we're useless. So everything that we talked about this morning, I want you to think about this, and I want you to meditate on Psalm 1. And Shannon is going to read it. It's a beatitude that sets up the rest of the story in Psalms. So be in a spirit of prayer.
Blessed are those who do not follow the advice of the wicked, or take the path that sinners tread, or sit in the seat of scoffers. But their delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law they meditate day and night. They are like trees planted by streams of water, which yield their fruit in its season, and their leaves do not wither. In all that they do, they prosper. The wicked are not so, but are like chaff that the wind drives away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish.